order. We all just scrambled here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sales Chatter Data Take Wednesday. Yo, the mad scientist Data, Dean Croke, our main man with the master plan. Today, we're going to talk about Road Check Week. Kind of what happened. What was it? What did we see? What's coming next? Be right back. To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. We got a clear winner this week, my friend.
I'm just going to say, Jeff is a true gentleman. I think he allowed this. I think he did take a back seat. I think he did. I'm going to give him some credit. I think he did. He's 8 seconds behind, so I think he waited.
I think the scramble messed him up. So here's the thing.
It could be.
Okay, so this is a contest. It's okay. Hold on. So Jeff is. Don't get me wrong, Jeff. I know you're a class act, but if anyone's holding back, that is not really fair to the other people that's trying to win because you're actually not. I don't know. If Jeff is doing that, you gotta stop. You gotta
stop it. So, morning, everybody. Morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Richard.
Morning,
guys, we've got a wicked amount of stuff to talk about today. But
yes, we do.
Before we do, as we all talked about off air, I think it would be appropriate with what happened in Texas yesterday, just to take a quick moment of silence for all the families, for everyone that's suffering through that. And, I just could never even imagine going through that. So would you guys be okay if we just kind of took a moment of silence here and just rested? Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
I think it's so important, that with the atrocity and I couldn't imagine. And I don't want this to get into a political conversation because I know everybody's got their views. I think everybody can agree that 18, 7, 8, 9-year-olds losing their lives is just it's beyond words. It's beyond anything. So, thank you everyone for that. Thank you for doing that. I'm way late after a long night seeing Maverick 2 days early. Good for you.
It's a good movie, I heard.
Can't wait to see it. Heard he was an absolute nightmare to work with. He fired the staff 3 times during the filming of that movie. So
always.
We're so naive, right? To what really happens on sets, and I think. Have you guys seen that Alec Baldwin movie, or the special? I think it was a special on ABC where on one of his film sets, somebody actually got shot.
Yeah,
there was an actual bullet in the gun.
I heard.
And kind of that show gave us a deep insight into how a movie's done, right? I don't know, but I read an article.
Tom's a perfectionist. He's a perfectionist, right? That's why.
And apparently he's very difficult to deal with.
Oh man.
Yeah, and
people have said the same about me.
Who says that about you?
Some bloke. I saw some bloke on the internet.
You know what? I might have saw some bloke do that too as well, and I might have replied to him. And Jeff
Hold on, boys. Pull it back. It's okay.
Pull it back.
All right.
What was Seinfeld? Serenity now.
You just
all right.
And I heard that works.
I don't know if it does, but
eyeballs.
I'd be doing this all day. My earlobes would be like this big. So Dean, today we're all scrambled. We're mixed up. We're all in different positions. It's good.
Yeah.
Did you see how habit how the habit of kind of the structure, how we usually have this pyramid is changed. And the first thing DJ
freaked
was
me out.
as we were going live, DJ's like, wait.
Yeah, hold on. How do I get up here?
Creatures of habit. Yeah. Creatures of habit. So speaking of habit,
Nice
truck check week. Like what a transition into that, right? Drivers have a habit of saying, yeah, I'm going to take a week vacation. I'm going to go off.
A pass.
Yeah, I'll take a pass.
They habitually do take time off at this moment.
If you've ever been in one, so I drove into one by accident in Connecticut one day on I-95, and I vowed I'd never do it again. And it wasn't so. My Peterbilt's pretty low to the ground, and the guy couldn't get under it because of all the stuff I've got under it. So it was kind of a nightmare. They didn't want to let me go because they couldn't get under it because they had too much chrome and bling on it. And they said at the end, they said, obviously you don't drive the truck for a living and it's clearly well looked after. So we're going to give you a pass, but don't come back here again. The problem was it took me 5 hours and there was a line of trucks out the road. So it took me about 2 hours to get into the slot because they were doing 6 trucks at a time. But there was a massive line of trucks. So fast forward to ELD days, that's like you lose a day's productivity in a heartbeat. And I get that. I've seen some of the social media posts of what some of the troopers do, and yes, they found some egregious faults, like some things trucks shouldn't have been on the road. Absolutely, a lot of trailers. We've got a lot of drop trailers, trailer pools, trailers sitting around for the last couple of years, loaded. There's a lot of problems. So, long story short, it's a week traditionally where carriers take some time off. This year's been a little bit different, and I talked about this, I think, on our last show, maybe the one before. I have a good friend of mine that's got a cracked windscreen in his 379 Peterbilt. You can't get one. So rather than run into road check week and get defected and put out of service, he sat the week out. And I wonder how many truckers can't get parts because of this supply chain shortages.
Great.
And so this is sort of anecdotal. I know more than one guy that's done that this time, on top of the guys that just say, yeah, we've had a great year, we'll just go on vacation. So Jeff's saying, I've got that app where you can avoid tolls and scales. So that's a hot seller.
Yeah, that's a good app.
Yeah.
I see that.
So what happened, Dan?
Can you reverse for a second? Because I want to make sure that for all of those out there, for all the brokers out there that don't fully understand truck check week, if you can just explain what it is, because after this, obviously it's a conversation we want all the sales reps to have with their customers when it starts coming up again, when the next time. So we want to educate them. So 5 hours to get in and out. What they're looking for, kind of what they do. I've never been through one personally. You have. So if you can kind of explain it, so at least it gives them more context and depth into the conversation.
So, state troopers do a wonderful job up and down our highways. They have inspection pads set up at unused, at rest areas, unused scale houses. They'll typically set up. They'll even set up at a scale house that's open. They'll pull you around the back and do their level 1 inspection. It's a full check of the entire truck. So this goes on every day of the week throughout the entire country. There's state troopers out doing this work. That's their job. But during Road Check Week, International Road Check Week, they do a 72-hour safety blitz. So it's everybody is out in force at every location they can possibly get simultaneously across the country. And it's a really big deal for carriers because, this might sound strange, it's not so much I'm going to avoid it because I'm worried about something being wrong on my truck. I always like people to look at my truck and tell me what I've missed. That's always a good thing. Yeah. But it's the time. I can't, in today's market with ELDs and time pressures, a lot of drivers can't afford the time to be off the road. So that's why they take time off, they do maintenance work, they do all sorts of things other than drive into roadblocks. Now, there's 2 types of drivers. There are drivers that have really good equipment that want to take time off and who aren't worried about safety. They can afford to take time off. There's a lot of other drivers who don't like the company they work for and deliberately drive into Road Check Week because the company won't repair their gear. So there's that goes on. Now, so I think there's a real tenure element to this. The old wise foxes would never run into a road check location. But there's a lot of other guys who aren't connected to the outside world. They don't have CB radios in their truck. They're driving a truck in between other jobs. They're not serious about the career. They're kind of what I call steerers, not drivers. They just steer the truck.
So they have that
There's
for
no-
trucking as well. I didn't realize
Oh,
that. We
yeah.
call
Yeah.
in the snowmobile world we call them weekend warriors.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a lot of guys that just drive into these, and because they know the maintenance has not been kept up on the trailers or the trucks. So it's a 72-hour safety blitz. They had something like 45,000 inspections last year across the country. About 30% of the problems thereabouts were brake and wheel related. Really serious stuff. So they did brakes, they did wheel ends again this year for the second time in a row, because someone asked me a few months ago, how do you prepare for road check week? And I said, are you kidding? You don't. You should never have to prepare your brakes and tires and wheels for road check week, because every time you roll out of the yard, they have to be perfect. And so it's a really interesting thing that a lot of people get worried about road check week because they haven't been doing their maintenance properly. You should never be on the road if your maintenance is not up to speed. So what happens every year on our load board market, in the spot market, we see a bunch of carriers not post their trucks for loads either side. So last week in dry van, we saw 16% fewer trucks post their equipment on load boards looking for loads compared to the week before. In reefer, it was about 18%, and in flatbed, it was about 12%. This year, it was really interesting. This year, we saw about double the number of carriers not post their trucks on our load boards. Which, posting your truck on a load board looking for freight is a really good proxy for demand, like how much carriers are looking for demand, or you can look at it from a supply point of view or capacity. So we just see capacity disappear out of the market every time this year. Going back over the previous 5 years, last week's drop in equipment posts was about double the 5-year average. So a lot of guys took time off last week, and guess what? Capacity tightened, spot rates went up. For the first time this year. That's line haul spot rate. So a lot of people have been getting confused about, all-in rates versus line haul. Line haul is the underlying rate, while line haul rates are coming down, fuel surcharges going up. So all-in rates, including fuel, are actually going up. Rates have never been as high as they are when you include the fuel surcharge. But the underlying base rate that a lot of owner-operators get, and then some of the fuel surcharge, reversed course last week, which is really, really good news for carriers listening. It kind of starts this upward inflection in spot rates we see until July 4. So we've got Labor Day. Is it Labor Day? I always get confused. Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
Yeah. So Memorial Day, and then we've got, and of course, grilling season starts on Memorial Day.
Yep.
And that goes through to July 4. We've got Independence Day celebrations. So this is a really interesting season where, unlike any other quarter, we see a lot of inflationary forces acting on spot rates in Q2 of each year. So good news. Last week, load to truck ratio was up. Load post volumes, the volume of load posts on our load board, only 2% less than last year. So there's
That's a pretty good number. That's a good number.
So it's a very healthy spot market. The difference is that there's just a lot of capacity in the market chasing fewer loads. So spot rates are coming down. Contract rates have peaking. Interesting number out last week from our shipper consortium. The contract loads. So when you think about contract freight, contract rates were negotiated some time ago with an annual RFP or a mini bid, maybe 6 months ago or 3 months ago. Those rates, as they enter the routing guides, are slowing. The rate of increase has halved. So for I think this is an important point, because when you think about spot rates lead contract rates directionally. So contract rates are peaking, spot rates are coming down. Eventually contract rates will follow that sort of arc down, and then we'll be into our next cycle. So in the last 2 weeks of April, brand new rates coming into the routing guide that were negotiated on for contract rates are up 11% in the last 2 weeks of April. In the first 2 weeks of May, they're only up 6%. They're only up 6%. So I guess what I'm trying to say, this sounds really squirrely, but the rate of increase of contract rates is slowing down, which means the contract rates are cresting, right? And eventually that market cycles. So for those out there that are buying capacity, it looks like contract rates are cresting and starting that downward trajectory. And definitely we all know about spot rates have been heading down. Typically in a normal market, spot rates lead contract in a 4 to 6 month time frame. So by the time, you get 4 to 6 months out from the decrease, contract rates start to come down and they kind of lag, and then they'll come back up again. So that's where we're at as of last week. It's great news for carriers. It's still a very healthy freight market, even though spot rates are down and diesel prices did come down about 4 cents a mile. Still a lot of pain out there for owner-operators that are paying retail for diesel. So not good news on that front, and no end in sight as to when that problem is going to resolve itself, even though we've got I think President Biden said we've got a oil reserve release of like 1 million barrels a day for 6 months to try and help take the pressure off diesel prices. So not sure what's going on in the diesel market, but we do hope that sort of corrects itself pretty soon.
So, Dean, I got a couple of questions, and maybe this could be a lead into next week's show. So I read an article from the Wall Street Journal this morning on the logistics side of it, talking about all of the shortages to expect coming up, because a lot of countries now are stopping a major part of their export in order to, like, Indonesia being one. 65% of the world's palm oil comes from Indonesia. And palm oil is in like potato chips, chocolate bars, like almost every food has palm oil in it. And they're actually, so Indonesia has a shortage of cooking oil. So believe it or not, they make 65% of the world's palm oil, which is involved in cooking and all the sprays and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But they actually import cooking oil for themselves.
Right.
And so what they're doing is they're stopping production, and we don't know if it's going to be 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. They're saying until our supplies of cooking oil are up to where we can actually help our country, we're not exporting. And I'm reading, and like Madrid is stopping exports of chicken. There's like all these different countries that are stopping the exports. From what you've seen, or from what, and I know I'm hitting it with you kind of like on the spot, do you think this is going to play into spot rates as well? Because now companies that say produce that product, it's becoming a needed commodity, right? You look at just like baby formula last week, there was a huge thing, baby formula. And it's like now companies are flying it in, paying that $40,000, $50,000 to charter, $90,000 to charter.
Yeah.
That's all, when it lands at the airport, it still needs to be trucked to stores, and it still needs to be put on pallets and brought in properly.
Yeah.
Do we see, with that imbalance of product, is that going to make put a market disruption, say, in the trucking side of it, where people are going to say, okay, I don't care what it costs, get a truck here at this time because this needs to get to the store now, expedite it, team drivers, all that kind of stuff.
Yep. I think it'll be a repeat of what you saw early last year, Dan, with your bed sheets trying to get from, Asia at Christmas time all the way through to Orlando. We're seeing similar things right now. So the answer is yes. Big picture, yes, there will be a repeat of last year where we saw lots of vessel bunching, volatility, volume of containers overwhelming the dray market, overwhelming the contract freight, overwhelming the intermodal markets, the capacity, and then it spills over into the spot market. And next thing you've got, long haul carriers draying loads from Savannah to Chicago on a chassis trailer, or you've got people transloading and moving freight, in 53-foot vans. So yes, that's going to happen, just like it did last year. So I've always been an advocate for watch the ports, watch the news around ports. When you see pictures of vessels bunching, that within a couple of weeks you're going to see a lot of volume at that port freight market.
Well, now with Shanghai and everything, and all that added to the additional mix of the shortages and all. I mean, do you think we're in for kind of this perfect storm come a month or two from now?
Well, I think so. There's two schools of thoughts. I noticed that the port of Savannah ports, I think it's Savannah, were sort of ratcheting down their forecast for inbound volume. They weren't. I'm not sure whether they see something that we don't. But there's two schools of thought. One is we've got a massive build-up of inventories that's already occurred. So we've got a lot of inventory. You're already seeing a lot of sales for excess inventory that big box retailers are trying to move. The other school of thought is we've still got a lot of product that's got to come from Asia for the normal seasons that we've got coming up for summer, fall, holiday season. So there's still that volume to come in. So I think that's I'm erring on the side of I still think we'll see more import volume come in, but I don't know that it's people can start cancelling orders just yet because they've got a lot of inventory built up. The other side, though, Dan, that I think, and the Port of Oakland put out a story this week on their exports. Their exports are down. So Oakland is the number one port for refrigerated exports in the country. Right? We export a lot of pork and beef to Asia out of the Port of Oakland. And they said that, and I'll just read the numbers here, their export volumes are down, I think it was something like 7% or thereabouts in the month of April because they can't get ships. So they can't get the vessels from. So when you've got all these vessels piled up in Asia, they're out of sequence, right? And then so they're not coming in, and they're not seeing the normal number of port calls to send the exports back out. So that's going to be an issue, I think, for exporters this season when we get into our summer crops again, because you've got a shortage of empty containers. I think there'll be a shortage of empty containers inland, because you've still got a lot of containers coming into the coasts, but they're being emptied quicker and going straight back.
You know, it's interesting you brought that up because so many people focus on the inbound containers, you just have to go to LinkedIn and everything's about the inbound containers and it's going to be a container getting again. I've not seen one person post about the outbound. Hey guys, FYI, if you're dealing with these shippers, your volume's going to decrease here because there's no inbound containers to reload to go outbound. They're just going back empty because they need them so quickly. That's an interesting.
Let me read the stats. I got the stats here. Oakland's export volume was down 11% last year, but it was down 10.8% last month. And the reason
what would that equate to in volume?
Oh gosh, good question. My memory, I can't remember the exact number. I did a study on this and wrote about it a few months ago. I can get it, but the reason is too few ships and not enough containers to meet demand. And that's going to be a trend, I think, for a lot of export people. You know, Savannah's the other big one. Elizabeth, New Jersey is another big export port. But reefers in particular going out of Oakland, they've been hit pretty hard for the last 16, 18 months. Not good news on that front. I think that's
does that also with the beef and the pork, but is also there the issue with produce because they just issued another. Was it 2 days yesterday or the day before? They issued another statement in California where they've issued another water restriction.
Right.
Again.
Right.
So they've restricted it even more.
Yeah.
And so now you have so I think on your show yesterday, I think you had mentioned, or was it Ken that mentioned, it was something like 32% down or 26% down produce. Like it went from 50% and then now they've kind of got a bit of it back and it's about 26 or what was the percentage?
I've got the numbers here for you if you want them. We were down, produce was down, not quite that much, but it's down more in California. So it's down 14% year over year, up 6% in May. This is the number of weekly truckloads. So to your point, Dan, here's the important thing to remember. When I count the number of truckloads that the USDA report that are moving for fruit and vegetables, we're down about 30,000 truckloads last week. 30,000 compared to a year ago.
Oh, shit.
So you wonder why rates are down in reefer in certain produce markets. So here's the important thing to remember. Of the 30,000 nationally, we're down 20,000 out of California alone. We're down 1,000 out of Florida, and we were down 3,000 out of the Southeast, where produce season is underway. But they have had a much colder start to the season. So that's what's happening in the produce market. We're way down year over year, much fewer truckloads. There's a lot of downward pressure on spot rates. Remember, a lot of produce moves in small fleets on load boards with brokers out of farms. Right? So it's an important market for a lot of small carriers because this is money-making quarter. You make some pretty good margins this quarter after a really slow start. But the reason I mentioned all those numbers is California is sort of the bellwether for the produce season, and it's off to an incredibly slow start. Water restrictions, fewer acres planted, much longer season last year. Citrus volumes will be down this year. So that's why we sort of look at our rates and think, we don't see the big bump in spot rates around July 4 that we normally see. It's going to be pretty tough sledding, to use your hobby sport analogy. It'll be tough sledding for carriers, I think, for the next few months.
I like how you added that in.
I do like how you added that in. And I hate to play devil's advocate, and before we go to some of these comments, but again, I think that Dan, you mentioned perfect storm, and the thing we have to remember. I mean, some things that I've heard. I've heard that gas could go average across the United States, not just California over $7, but United States over $7. If that happens, what happens? How bad does it get? Also, there's a lot of fake money pumped into from the stimmy checks and all of that. Now that's not there, so people's buying power is a lot less than it used to be. The only money out there now is the rich. So you got to keep that in mind as well.
Here's my conspiracy theory person in me coming out, guys. And so here's what it is. Not this weekend that passed, the weekend before, we had some friends over, and I was saying, hey, like I've passed $1.88 a liter, and my friend goes, "Oh my God, that's cheap." And I go, "You see, that's the problem. They raise the price to $2 a liter. Then when you find it for $1.88, it's cheap." Like I remember when gas was under $1 a liter. So what would that be, like $3 a gallon, $2.50, something somewhere in that range?
It was under $1 here.
And then
$1.
And then they raise it, and it's like some gas stations had to get a new sign out front because it was never meant for triple digits, like $1 something a liter. And it's like $1.05. Then they drop it to 95 cents, which is like 40 cents a liter more than it was. And we're like, oh my gosh, that's cheap. And we flood to the market. So my conspiracy theory is they raise the price so high that when they drop it, we're like, oh my gosh, it's cheap. And I'll tell you, I'm going through the same thing with wood. Yesterday, and I found myself saying it yesterday, I went to go get 20 more pieces of wood to finish my bar and my diving rocks for the pool. And I'm in the store, and the guy says, I said, "How much are they now?" He says, "Oh, they're $10.20 for an 8-foot 2x4. And I went, "Oh my gosh, yeah, okay, I'll take 20. And then as I'm walking out of the store with the chit, I'm going, what the hell is wrong with me? They used to be $5 a piece. Literally over double the price. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so cheap. I'll take 20. I'll stock up, right? It's like it just doesn't make sense. So anyways, that's my conspiracy theory.
I agree. But I mean, that's the whole idea of inflation, though, is to get you more used to those numbers.
Yeah. Jeff says there was carrier chatter this past, avoiding scales and running at night. Sorry, we already did that. Joshua, awesome show yesterday, brother. Like, so inspirational. We love you, man. I can't wait to have you back after.
My quote is the quote for the show is actually I seen it last night.
Josh quote.
So shout out.
Sweet morning, fellas. My man Dean Crook. Jeff says, in the past, I did not hire a carrier who avoids inspections. That's interesting. Jeff, I have a question for you on that, and throw it into the comments, or even we could talk about it on Friday when you're on the show. But I'd like to know how you figured that out, like how you figured out if they avoided inspections, because that would be great information for other people to have. Panels and shippers, do you want a carrier working for you who avoids inspections? I mean, has a point when it comes to time.
Obviously you don't, but that's why they're doing the inspections to begin with, is these carriers who are, like Dean's saying, riding their stuff, their brakes down to nothing, riding, they're the ones they're actually watching for.
But if you have carriers like, sorry, Dean, go.
Well, they could be having the week off doing repairs too.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad. I mean, I know a lot of people that do.
No,
and if you focus on safety and you have a good safety and your trucks are all up to date, road check week would be more of a get the degenerates off the road, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that was appropriate or not, but get the people off the road that avoid safety to try and make more money. I mean, I remember, I think it was on the 401 a decade ago. A dolly foot, like literally a foot from a trailer, came right out of the trailer and went through a windshield and killed somebody. Yeah. Like the actual dolly leg fell off, hit the ground, bounced, and went right through a window and killed somebody. So there's some pretty bad people out there. Here's the thing, right? As a carrier who focuses on safety, who puts a lot of money and effort and energy into safety and compliance and service and making sure that you got to be pissed off going through road week if you have a fleet of 160 of them are stuck for 5-6 hours in one day. Like, it's not just one truck. You got to think of all the lost productivity for somebody who is safe, right? And I mean, as you said, there was some serious issues with some serious trailers, and some drivers drive for a company that don't focus on. They want to drive into road check week just so they can get their rig fixed. Because I mean, I don't know. I like to think that
I agree with that, Dan. There are some seasoned guys. I talked to a few drivers. They're the ones who know this is, and there's less trucks on the road, so it's kind of like working on the holiday. You know,
Right.
you work on a holiday for double time, overtime, for that kind of stuff. Same thing.
Yep.
Then we have Jeff. Oh, Jeff said that. And then Nigel, welcome, brother. I've stopped cooking with Russian oil. My food tastes better and I don't get headaches anymore.
Wow.
Jeff says, as a shipper, I don't want my products being hauled by someone who is illegal or has problems, for sure. I mean,
Absolutely.
that's obvious, right? Because even if you get pulled into a chicken coop and they find something wrong with you, they'll put you out of service, right? So for all of you who don't know, chicken coop is a scam. That.
It's a lot of trailers, right? You know, trailers are a huge problem, right? You just talk to drivers, right? One of their biggest causes of frustration beyond sitting on a loading dock too long is hooking under a trailer in a drop trailer yard and finding something wrong with it left by the previous driver.
Yeah,
it drives drivers insane. So I think trailer pools are not necessarily a reflection of the driver, even though he should do a pre-trip check. He's not responsible for the entire maintenance of the trailer, even though he does do the truck. He's only under that trailer for a trip. So it's fairly difficult for him to do, and it shouldn't be. I know I'm making excuses, but there should be much better maintenance applied to trailers that sometimes only do a load per week, that sit around. I've looked at trailer telematics data where some trailers do 10 loads a month, others do 1 a month, and they sit and degrade. And then, of course, they get pulled into service. They look okay, but of course they're not. And I think that's where a lot of work needs to be done, because everyone talks about drivers in this regard. I think it's got a lot to do with maintenance of trailers also.
You know, when I was at an asset company, we did a little study, and so what we did is all our owner operators, we gave certain trailers. And then our fleet drivers had other trailers, and we set owner operators on specific loops that they had their trailer. And we found about a 40% higher use in trailer brakes with owner operators because they want to use the trailer brakes, which get serviced by the company, as opposed to either their Jake brake downshifting or hitting their brakes on their tractor. And it was really interesting because it's like, okay, wow. So you don't have the trailer service, so why not use up that brake? And then so we see that trailers with owner operators need to come in for service more often than trailers with company.
Right. Owner operators don't do that.
So another thing to think about is it was an interesting study, and it actually was mind blowing because I was young when that happened. So I was naive. I'm like, well, why would they do that? That's not fair to us. And the owner looks at me. He's like, come on, man. Because did you just ask me that question? That's kind of like a Bill Engvall. Here's your sign. But I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me. Why would they do it? He goes, because they pay to maintain. They pay for their brake jobs. They hit trailer brake.
When you get a rental car, do you beat the hell out of it or what? Yeah, I mean, most people do because they don't care.
That's the problem.
I don't either. I baby the thing like, well, why am I doing this? But I know there are people that beat the shit out of it. Like, well, it's not my car. Like, whoa.
Yeah, dude, I gotta tell you a hilarious story, and I know it's totally off topic. So I was in New York on a business trip, and I had my senior VP of sales with me, and this guy he was like one of the funniest and craziest people you've ever met in your life, right? And we get into a rental car, and he's driving through New York, and he's like, and he's hitting pothole after pothole. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? He goes, that's okay, it's a rental car, man. And he hits this pothole, and I see this like this thing come up the side of me. And I go, what was that? He goes, I was probably the hubcap. Don't worry about it. We're going to, and he's just, and it was one of these things where I'm like, holy crap. So we pull up to this stoplight. And there's this no. It was like, so we're at this stoplight and we go, and as we're about to go, it goes green. A bike comes in front of us, and he we're trying to restore the connection, and the guy on the bike turns around and boots the quarter panel of the car. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, thank God we got that insurance. And just takes off. It was like, and I was blown away. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, anyways, I figured that'd be a cool side story.
What you say? You just nailed it right there.
Yeah, exactly. So, Nerfat, oh man, I missed you because of meeting again. Holla gangsters, hope y'all having a good day and trying to stay up positive and hungry in a very crazy and ruthless world. Yes, you're absolutely right, brother. If you know it's DOT week and my carrier is moving freight, I want to see their inspection certificate. If not, why? That's interesting. That's one call to action for them. That hey, transparency, right? It's a relationship. You should, and you know what? Not only that, the next part of it would be, hey, listen, FYI, Mr. Customer, here's the certificate, here's the valid, just so you know, we're running on the up and up. But however, with truck check week, sometimes trucks get delayed 3, 4, 5 hours, which can cut into ELD, which can cut into your delivery time.
But what if you don't? What if you don't get inspected? I mean, you've got to remember the probability of being pulled over and inspected is a really low probability event.
What would it be? Do you think? How many? So you got what? 40,000.
Last time I looked at some large fleets in terms of the number of times a truck is inspected, it was like once every 9 months. A lot of people think that it's
like from their safety department, or you're talking from?
Yeah, no. When you look at the DOT, stats, when you go in and download a fleet's DOT number, and you look at the number of inspections over time for each truck, like it's everyone thinks that. Well, not everyone, people think you're getting pulled over all the time. No, it's not. It's a fairly rare event. Even when you drive into a scale house, the chance, I don't know, I got checked once in like 10 years running over a scale. Now, I probably shouldn't because I was bobtail, but the probability of being pulled over is a fairly low event on our highways. It's not like it happens all the time. So anyway, we digress, but Road Check Week had a big effect on rates, and it's kickstarted some things. Let's leave it at that.
Dean, were you about to go on a rant?
He was close, but he was close. But I will tell you just to touch on Jeff's point. Jeff, I know what you're beating at. You're beating a dead horse, though. I think it's just the world, and it's just humanity. People are going to use cheap options. Think of people who use contractors. There's really good contractors that follow all the rules. In Ohio, you don't need to actually do anything but pay $75, and you're a contractor. So you got a lot of those too. They're going to be a lot cheaper as well. People are going to use them.
Well, and then there's the ones that leave a third of the way through the job and walk off and leave you with it. I mean, I wouldn't know anything about that, but right. People often say you get what you pay for. Right. And I see that in a lot of respects in transportation as well. Like so DJ, you've been on the sales side. I know, Dean, you haven't been on the broker side, but you find a really good deal on a truck. You kind of hold your breath for 36, 48 hours, depending on how long it takes to pick up and deliver.
You second guess everything. You second guess everything. Actually.
Every time they give you an update, you're like, is that really where they are? And I don't know how many times I've gone to PC Miler and I'm like, okay, they picked up here, and I'm looking where they are, and I'm like, oh, that's I don't know. That's stretching it. I'm like, are they really there? And you're debating this before you give your customer the information, because you're only as good as the information you get. So if you get shit, you pass shit on, right? And then it comes back and hits you in the face.
But see, for us, seeing that rate, we know what the rate should be. So if it's a crazy rate, we're like, hold on, why? There's other brokers out there that are, I could just make more money. I'm going to take this guy. And they're not even thinking about it. And
then they run into headaches. They run into problems. And then those ones are typically the ones that come back and say, this business is friggin' brutal. But then they give a bad name to
all the brokers.
Oh, everybody's a liar. Everybody's, but you got to kind of call a spade a spade. You got to 8 Mile this bad boy, right?
8 Mile.
So
that's right.
I know we got way off the highway there. Like, we're literally in the boonies. We got to bring it back.
That's all right. Bring it back.
So, yeah, absolutely. Share your dry van and reefer trends for sure. Let's do it.
Please.
Yes, I was thinking about Data Wednesday and thinking we probably should talk about this. One of the phenomenons we see each year, and of course this is not news to anybody, maybe if you're new to the industry, but when produce season starts, a lot of carriers that haul dry van freight in their reefer van most of the year head over to the farm to load fruit and veg. So what happens typically in some of those markets is, in a bizarre way, dry van capacity tightens because there's fewer trucks to haul the dry freight. So what we see in some markets is dry van spot rates increase in produce markets, which is kind of counterintuitive. But I think if you're buying capacity, you need to be acutely aware of the timing of the crops, when they're coming online, so Southeast region, right, where produce season's well and truly underway. Southeast region. So in the Southeast region, dry van line haul rates increased for the 4th week in a row last week, up 8 cents a mile. Jacksonville rates up. Charleston on the West Coast in Fresno, dry van rates were up 2 cents a mile to 2.13 excluding fuel. That's after dropping for the 3 weeks prior. Same thing in Ontario, just next to Fresno. So what you'll typically see is that anywhere you've got a produce market that's coming online from a harvest perspective, you will see capacity tighten on the dry van side. So it's one thing to watch for. It's another thing that sort of influences dry van rates seasonally. And we're starting to see some of that around the country and some of those hot produce markets that are starting to harvest.
That's interesting. It brings you back to that geographical sense, really understanding where your shippers are coming from. I remember there was times when I was pulling freight out of Nashville, I was actually competing with Atlanta melons and stuff. And there were drivers that would normally move and this was prior to a, dedication partnership. I mean, I tried to use the same carriers all the time because I knew they were there. And I remember one guy telling me, no, Dan, I go grab melons. And early on in the business, I was like, well, don't you need reefers for that? He goes, oh, no. I send all my drivers at this time of year with a Sawzall and a drill. And when we get a melon load, if we don't have vents in the trailer, he literally pulls over on the side of the road and cuts a hole in the side of his trailer and installs. So he gives him a rivet gun, a Sawzall, and a drill. And he says, we just buy a bunch of vents. And he goes, listen, I can run produce with that trailer. And come wintertime, if I need to just put a new panel in, it's so worth it. And I was like, you what? And he's like, yeah. And all I picture is this driver on the side of the road cutting a hole in the side of his trailer. But it's so true.
I hold a lot of produce in Australia on drop decks and flat top trailers, just with double tarp canvas tarps. So you can actually I hold a lot of onions on a flatbed with no straps. You actually don't need straps if you pull down your tarp in the first hour. You use canvas tarp with ropes, not bungee cords. Like I said, you think tarps in Australia, you can actually haul produce on a lot of flatbeds if you use the right sort of load restraint via the actual cap tarp itself and the ropes, because you can tension the load down. It doesn't. It gets a little bit of airflow through if you don't bring the tarp all the way to the what we call the coaming rail, or the bottom part of the trailer. So your flatbeds, I see a lot of flatbeds bringing onions out of Mexico into Boston market. I'm not sure what the onions.
Interesting. I never knew that.
Long way and a lot of sweating going on under that tarp, right? So I don't know what the onions are going to be used for, but.
Yeah,
that would make sense, right? Because it's exposed to the extreme heats coming out of there in the sunshine, and
Well, you've got to go like you've never drive the wheels off it to keep the airflow going. So maybe that's what they do.
And so with ELDs and stuff, do you see less of that happening because now they're restricted, right? They can't run 2 logbooks and kind of go down for 4 hours and get back up and go.
Well, in a bizarre way, these were pre-2000 trucks. So these weren't these were ELD exempt trucks, which maybe that's part of the reason they were doing it. So, but running at night's another thing. But vented vans, yeah. So what I found was that you can haul a lot of produce in dry vans, vented vans, when the ambient temperature is sort of below 50 degrees outside. Once you get above 50, then you start to head into the reefer market. But vented vans haul a lot of produce most of the year. So it's depends on the product.
And Dan, you brought up a great point too, the seasonality and regions with produce, guys. I remember certain times, obviously produce season, but any of my loads coming up from going down to Florida, they would take super cheap because they knew they were getting paid 100%. Really well coming back. So, also keep that in mind. You're going to see a shift there too.
Well, and that's a big understanding of the market you go into and come out of. And
right.
I'll use the example of a customer of mine had massive amounts of freight shipping into the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when Houston kicked in and all the containers are coming out of Houston and it was sucking up all the capacity, people started dropping their rates to go into that area. So they would drop their rates to go into Dallas and then come back, go right over to Houston and come back out and still be very profitable. And they actually didn't pay attention to that. And somebody came in from the spot market and dropped rates to their customers, and they lost a bunch of business. And that's why these data days are so important to you as an intermediary, as somebody in the middle, even as a carrier, is understanding what else is out there in order to educate the customer. Hey, and even to the point where Mr. and Mrs. Customer, you're going to see a drop in spot rates because this is happening. We have a dedication. I'm going to talk to my supplier, understand the market, and see where we can meet. But just understand, this is a minute window. Things will
I
reverse
love that you
course.
brought that up, because that usually is the windows. If you guys are working with customers like that and this spot market does go down, that's when somebody comes in just undercutting, because that's the game, and then it washes out what could be a good relationship because they're just taking advantage of a situation.
Well, and here's the thing, right? If you're trying to get those produce loads as a carrier, right? If you're trying to get those produce loads, and and I did it with Transcend. We had Dell Computer, we had Microsoft, we had Apple, we had all of these major electronic companies. I would literally move freight for 80 cents a mile to get there, to get the $5 a mile back. Because in my triangle, it worked. Origin, destination, right? In that triangle, it works on an ROI and a rate per mile, and we make heavy profits.
Yeah.
So some people have better paying freight in certain areas. This is what, perfect example is when I was at my last company, we were dealing with Hertz, and this will lead us right into your flatbed rates, Dean. We were dealing with Hertz, and a lot of people don't know, but Hertz actually rents a lot of heavy machinery, like excavators, dump trucks, rollers, like massive amounts of heavy machinery. It's actually a second part of their business. And I had a file that was literally 8 inches thick of all the rates we were giving them. And we started doing a bunch of business with them. And then other people started realizing that Hertz does this. And it got to a point where we were rating, and on like a $6,000 flatbed move, I was putting $200 or $150, and we weren't getting it. And I had my senior VP call me and say, listen, this gentleman, Jason, wants to, he's had a few of his suppliers say, like, why aren't you dealing with this Hertz account? There's somebody else in your company. And at first I was like, what? Why wouldn't they just give me the better pricing? But he has the relationship with them. Do you know that he said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I haven't done anything with them in like 6 months. Take the account, give it to Jason. We took the account away from me and gave it to Jason. And do you know, in like the first week, he did over $6,000 profit with them. So like, he knew the players in that market. He had the relationships. He knew who to call. We were posting on load boards because it was new to us. So we're trying to build that relationship, and we weren't able to do it. Yeah. So certain people understand that commodity, that geography, those equipment types better than you, and they're able to do it better. Nothing changed. Like, nothing changed. Hertz still did the freight the way they did it. They still priced it the way they priced it. He was just able to make money at it. Where I wasn't. And I remember saying to him one day, like, you got to talk, you got to tell me about this, how it worked. And we sat down one day, and he just explained, like, he was in mining, he was in flatbed, he was in double drop, he was in OD. He knew all these people, and he knew what the going rates were. And it's great. But that leads us right into your conversation, Dean, with flatbed market.
Yeah, a lot of talk about, spot rates decreasing in dry van and reefer. Yes, that's been the case, but flatbed is quite the opposite. It's been fairly resilient. Capacity is still very tight. Rates reverse course last week. They're up about a penny per mile to 261, excluding fuel. So you're up around 330 as a national average there. For context, this is a really important point. Flatbed rates are still 10 cents per mile lower than this time last year, but 24 cents a mile higher than 2018. I think that's an important data point, because remember, 2018 was our last busy freight season. It was primarily a flatbed rate rally, strong industrial economy, primarily driven by flatbed spot rates, which went all the way through to July before they started to turn. But what I wanted to mention, if you're in the capacity acquisition space, in the broking area, flatbed is still very tight. And in some markets, rates are incredibly tight. So in Los Angeles, it's a big flatbed market. But after dropping for 3 weeks, flatbed rates jumped 28 cents a mile last week to an average of 269. 700 miles loads to Salt Lake City, averaging 312. Los Angeles to Las Vegas, $4.16 excluding fuel. It's almost 70 cents a mile higher than this time last year. I just looked at San Diego to Salt Lake City. It's at 310. It's about the same as what it was last year. When I was in San Diego a few weeks ago, I noticed a lot of break bulk ships bringing in plate steel and coil, and it was heading out on flatbeds. And then I looked at some of the rate data. So you could connect the dots and say must be some construction going on in Las Vegas, as there always appears to be by the number of tower cranes. So again, there's some flatbed markets that are still pretty hot. Miami, A lot of flatbed capacity tightness there. Load post volumes are up. In the Pacific Northwest, even out of Seattle, right? Normally you see a lot of truckload volume coming out of Medford and Portland, where they make a lot of softwood lumber, dimension frame lumber. Out of Seattle, spot rates are up 21 cents a mile last week out of Seattle, southbound. Los Angeles up to 237. Seattle to Los Angeles flatbeds up 34 cents a mile compared to this time last year. So even though there's all this doom and gloom in the market about, normally the opposite of the rising tide lifts all boats. When you see a freight recession, normally, everything sort of quietens down, or when things are hot, everything heats up. This market's very different. We're seeing a lot more capacity in dry van and reefer, but flatbed is still tight. There's a few reasons. It's a hard job. You need specialized trailers. You need lots of straps, chains, tarps, angles, what do you call those things you put across the angle? I can't remember the name of them. But you need lots of stuff to secure the load.
And you need qualified drivers to do it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's a lot of project work. A lot of project work to areas that you've never been before. You've got to sit under cranes for a disproportionate amount of time, and you've got a lot of deadhead miles. So it's an incredibly specialized sector that it's difficult for a dry van or a reefer driver to just suddenly go into flatbed and haul flatbed freight. You could swap between reefer and dry van. It's very hard to move across to flatbed with any degree of sort of ease. So I just wanted to make that point on Data Wednesday, or Data Wednesday. Depends what country you live in.
Tomato. Ketchup.
Right.
Data.
Data is what they say in Australia, and so I think the point is that even though there's a lot of doom and gloom talk, we aren't in a freight recession, and in fact, flatbed is doing exceptionally well. It'll be another strong year in flatbed, just like it was in 2018. So I think carriers in that sector are going to do well. If you're buying capacity, you've got to work hard to make sure you can get the right trucks on the right freight. I think this is a sector where you've got to be really careful. You got to make sure you get the right people under that load.
I remember when I was doing business with Schneider Electric, and they had a bunch of generators and power plants going up to the Bruce power plant up in Northern Ontario. And it was literally, they didn't care how qualified the driver was. Drivers sat through an hour and a half brief on how to strap this thing down, where to load it. Like while they were loading the trailer, they're like, you come in here and watch this. And then they had two people watching them. And it was interesting because I'm walking through and there is like shipments of smaller generators and they're charred. And I said, like, what's going on here? He goes, well, this was loaded on a flatbed. I guess they brought it back to their facility and they decided to load it into a dry van. And something happened and the van caught fire and it was like a $4 million claim. And I was like, interesting. I go, they took it off. He goes, yeah, I guess they just figured that, it was cheaper to do it that way or whatever the reason was. But he goes, like, literally this guy, we watched the guy, it being loaded, and we watched the guy strap it down here and he left on a double drop. And he says, like, normally it would have gone normally on a flatbed. It just happened to be a double drop because that was the equipment they can get. He said, so, they were only like 6 feet high or something, these generators, and they would go in one generator at a time, 8 feet long into a trailer. And he goes, like, we're still at that point, they were still investigating how it caught on fire. But it was like, at that point, they were, it was interesting because these people were trying to obviously charge flatbed rates and deliver in the drive. Right. But which is interesting because wouldn't you notice that the receiver notices it's not a flatbed when it arrives, right? Like, yeah, okay, but yeah. So Kurt says, I know, only the MTO stops trucks every 3 trips. Laugh out loud. At least that's what it seems like in Ontario when I was running my mini fleet. But in the U.S., it was very, very rare. I think 3 times per truck per 2-year cycle is when they would get inspected. Preet says, good morning, fam. Coconut oil for Western cuisine, qualified butter for Punjabi cuisine, and Pakistani cuisine in my household. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's what everybody uses it. And it's amazing how many products are actually made from it.
And Ryan, I was going to say niche. You pick a niche. You don't need to know everything. Exactly. Yes.
Get good at it.
Nailed it.
Hey, useless trivia. Do you want to know Matos yet?
Matos.
G'day, mate. Do you want to know how fires start in dry vans?
No. Break?
Because you think, how does it... Generally tires. So when you run, when you got duals, right? When one goes down and goes flat, then one taking all the load overheats and catches fire, blows up, and then all the load goes on the next tire, and that's how they generally start. One flat tire overloads the one next to it, and they start to get hot, and that's how you see a lot of tire fires start. So when you see a lot of drivers not pulling over to check their trailers, you can see a flat tire is always darker. You can always see a flat tire from when you're passing a truck. It's a darker color than the one next to it. That's why we always had a little bit of dust on our yards in Australia, because when the trucks would come back in and roll across the dust on the concrete, you could see all the imperfections on the tire, because the ones that are properly inflated would have a good layer of dust. The ones that were flat would be dark. We could see the scalloping where you've got where you've got busted wheel bearings. They start to scallop on the inside. They get this wavy pattern on the inside and outside edge, and the dust shows that. The other thing we do is we'd always have a hose near the diesel tank, and you hose all your wheels. The one with steam coming off has got hot wheel bearings. So there's tons of things people can do to stop tire fires, right? But a lot of it's got to do with just lack of vigilance, and you could smell a tire fire before it even gets to that point.
Those are great tips, though. Holy cow!
Yeah, those are great tips. Yeah. I mean, how many times have you seen smoke barreling out of the back of the bottom of a trailer going down the highway,
or especially with hot brakes? So yeah.
Yeah, and even when they hit the brakes, like when you're coming up to a traffic jam, you just see the smoke coming out. I mean, I've seen hundreds
you can
of times.
see it. You can see it in your mirrors, and you can smell it. So how
you can definitely smell that? Yeah.
How you ever catch a trailer on fire? I've had drivers do it in the middle of the outback, and it is not pleasant. We've had a multi-million-dollar machine get burned to the ground. There's no firefighters for like 700 miles.
It's kind of one of those, let it burn, let it.
That is one of those. What's around it? It's just got to
unhook the trailer and let it go.
Yeah. I mean, I had a friend of mine go on a sled trip this year and sent me a picture, and it literally a sled burning on the side of the trail because you're 200 kilometers away from any kind of civilization, and it's like, what are you gonna do? Kick snow on it? Come on, like it. You got gas, oil, and it's going. See you later. You just got to document it for the insurance company, and kind of figure out how to get it back after it's finished burning. But yeah, I can imagine. I mean, 700 miles out in the bush, and something happens, like you're on your own.
Yeah.
And that's where a CB comes in real handy.
We had long range radios because the CB doesn't go that far. We had long range radios that the Flying Doctor Service uses. In the outback, you don't have ambulances. You have planes that do all the medical emergency work called the Flying Doctor, and they work on long range radios. If you see a lot of trucks in the outback, they'll have massive long aerials on the front of the bull bar, so you can talk all the way across the entire country. Otherwise,
and that's not with CB. That's with a different communication tool.
Different communication channel. It's the same communication channel the pilots would use across the country.
Got it. Interesting.
Satellite radios are more popular. Satellite radios are fairly popular these days, so they help.
Yes. Yeah. So do we have? Is that it, boys? Is that all we're talking about today?
Yeah. Well, I think we're about time, unless you guys have anything else. Anybody out there?
Anybody out there looking for specific information?
Any questions? Any specifics you want us to cover? We got like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I like this hour. This hour is it feels so much. I don't know about you guys, but I feel more relaxed in the hour. We're not trying to cram so much.
Yeah, I don't feel like we're rushing through everything. So I do kind of like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The half hour just seemed really fast. So
next week's show, right? Next week's show is going to be fascinating to see if spot rates continue their upward trend. That's going to be a really big sign of how healthy this freight market is. ATA truckload tonnage was down about 2% in April. So things are, on the contract side, it definitely feels like tonnage is sort of, flatlining and maybe going down a little bit. But the resilience of the American consumer continues to amaze me. We're still buying stuff. And
I agree. It's crazy.
And also, if we can, maybe next week we can add to the back part of the show. We can do some research and find out which countries are halting production and where those other pieces of the puzzle might be coming out to maybe give salespeople an in-depth insight into, normally this country produces chicken and pork. This is where in the US and Canada where the most chicken and pork come from. So maybe have a conversation with your customer and maybe help all the reps get ahead of some of the curves that are happening when the storm hits. That might be a good part.
If you guys like that
too.
idea, just say yes in the comment or something so we know.
Yeah.
And it's also next week is the start of hurricane season.
Yep.
So we've got some data to share on what the hurricane season looks like. It's going to be another above average year on top of last year, which was one of the third costliest.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was running a bunch of freight into Savannah Port, a bunch of containers into Savannah, and then that hurricane, it was a couple of years ago, the hurricane hit the East Coast. It took out, I think, 42% of chassis, like twisted them and everything in Savannah. And it was an absolute nightmare. I mean, we looked at it and, it wasn't like FEMA was sucking up all the trucks, because it wasn't necessarily like from a destruction perspective, didn't do as much as like, the levees breaking in Louisiana and all that. But there was destruction, don't get me wrong, and people were displaced. But it was like we looked at it, and the one thing we were all focused on when it came to that was FEMA. Where's FEMA going? Because FEMA sucks up all the trucks. We've seen that.
Well, that was 2018 down in Houston.
I mean, with the polar vortex, But it's we looked and we're like, oh, we're good. And then for like 3 weeks, I'm going, why is it so difficult to get dray trucks to deliver the product? I was mind-boggling until you realize that was part of the issue. It's like almost 42 or 43% of the chassis in that area were twisted or unusable. Like that takes a huge amount of capacity out of the market, like huge.
Yeah.
Was it a flooding event? That one you're talking about, flooding as opposed to a wind event?
No, it was a hurricane. Like it was a wind event because they were twisted and the chassis were twisted. But I think they were expecting, and I'm not sure about the the geology of it or the geographic, whatever it means, meteorology of it. I don't even know if that's proper, but it was like supposed to be a category 4, which was like deadliest, and it downgraded to a 2 or something like that when it hit shore. So it was destructive. But what it did is it twisted up a lot of the chassis and all the other stuff that deals with port pickups. So like dry vans and flatbeds were still going in and out. So we actually had to load a lot of our containers on flatbed to get them to delivery, which would cost more than a chassis. Do you know what I mean? So it was just it was something for, and I mentioned it because it's just something for reps to look out for as to, okay, what's plan B? And we never equated for plan B. Like even, you can't really equate for plan B when FEMA says we have a natural disaster in this area, calling every and all trucks, because a lot of companies want to be that assistance, right? Yeah. Like, and it's I mean, I don't believe people do it just for promotion, but it's good promotion. Hey, we were at the front lines of FEMA and helping Texas for the polar vortex, right? But FEMA pays a lot of money to get stuff where they need it when they need it, because people need it to live.
And they'll stage a lot of that in the Alabama freight market, because you can get to most of it when you're in the sort of at the Maxwell Air Force Base. You can be, most of the areas where hurricanes make landfalls within about 5 hours.
Yeah, exactly. So but it sucks capacity from everywhere, right? And especially when it becomes to FEMA, they eliminate hours of service. There's a whole bunch of other political things that happen on that side, and law reductions and overrunning and all that in order to serve, right? So obviously, it's very attractive for companies to get in the mix.
It's hard to plan for the exact timing.
I think it's an awesome conversation next week ahead of the storm.
Yes,
that was no pun intended. Ahead of the storm is where Data Day Wednesday is always set, y'all. I don't know if y'all realize everything that's happening today we talked about 3 months ago. So pay attention.
Just keep following us on Wednesdays. Just keep following the mad scientist.
Watch us every day.
Right here. Dean, he's got his crystal ball. But again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dean, as always, for joining us every Wednesday, doing this hour show. Hopefully you guys like it. Excuse me.
Well, you're losing your voice already, bro.
You guys enjoyed it. Thank you to American Logistics Centurion Trucking for making this possible. As always, all of your comments and just joining us daily. Thank you guys for what you do. Again, Josh, don't know if you're still, good luck with your run. Don't know if you're still out there, but yesterday's show was so great. And I seen a quote at the end of the night that I was like, I love that quote so much. I know it has nothing to do with data, nothing to do with probably anything we're going to talk about, but I just loved it. And it was very much behind you, your driving force, Josh. So thank you. But and then don't miss tomorrow either. Brian Byro, guys, he's going to be here tomorrow. So Gonna be
If
a
you
great
ever
show.
wanted to know how to build a bulletproof team, tomorrow is the show to watch. If you want to learn about windows of opportunity and how to seize the woo, tomorrow's the one to watch.
Don't miss it, guys. All right, so this quote, I don't know if it came from the guy who posted it, so I'm not going to say his name, but it's measure success by how many people thank you for theirs.
It's deep.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information.